Delighted to have back in the studio with us Representative Dennis Richardson. And Mr. Representative, it's been quite a couple of weeks in our nation, and we have all been stunned by the tragedy in Newtown. I don't know if we still got our head and heart around it. It's kind of hard to process the grief and what has happened. But it has provoked this whole gun argument, as you well know. You've been on national news lately. You've been all over the press. And then augmented into your comments was Wayne LaPierre comes out and basically echoes what you were saying, and that is that we need to do something about school safety. But give us your original statement, because that's the one that kind of sparked the whole conversation.
Well, on the same day that the tragedy occurred, I received an email from a local superintendent of schools talking about the tragedy and so forth, and I wrote back, and I felt so frustrated that this happened again. It's been 14 years since Thurston High School in Springfield, 13 years since Columbine, 6 years since Virginia Tech, and still a shooter can go in a school that's in lockdown, that's got locked doors, and shoot his way in and be the only person that's armed on the premises. And so what I said was, had I been a teacher in Newtown and had the school district not prevented me from carrying on campus, and had I had a gun, there would have been fewer children killed, and the shooter would still be dead, but not by suicide. Right,
okay. That sparked a lot of response, and I get it. But you did some surveys. Tell us about this.
Well, I did a newsletter just shortly after this occurred, and in the newsletter I went through and kind of explained that what could be done, what is rational in a situation where there's not a 1 in a million chance that this problem is going to arise on your school district on any given day or on your campus. I said, why not have 2 or 3 volunteer school personnel on every campus that maybe they're ex-military or ex-law enforcement, or they just have a history of shooting and they are interested in guns, have them get extra training and let them be concealed carry on campuses, so that if in the event, this rare event that it might occur on your campus, there would be some kind of response so that the only armed person on the campus is not the shooter. These things happen very quickly, and when the police are 5 or 10 minutes away, seconds count. And after that first shot is fired, it would be so important to have someone who's trained on the campus who could decide whether or not they could respond, or at least show, and then retreat, or whatever needs to be done to help ensure that you don't have such an incredible casualty list when the only one that can stop the shooter is himself when he commits suicide.
It's interesting. I even saw a poll last night. Fox was running a poll. 64% agree with you.
Well, I did my own survey in this newsletter, and I got over 7,000 responses to my survey, and over 80% felt that we're not doing enough by just doing a lockdown and hunkering down and hoping that you're not the one that gets the bullet. And then I went on to say, how would you feel about having the ability for armed resistance or response on campuses? And over 70% said that would be an appropriate thing if they were trained.
All right, so what you are saying now, you'd rather have an individual be there.
Yes, not a police officer. Police officer costs $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And so which teacher you're going to lay off to do that? And when you have a possibility of less than 1 in a million that it's really going to happen, to place to put in your budget an armed officer or two in 99,000 public schools in America. There's 1,306 public schools just in Oregon. It is a cost-benefit situation you can't really afford. I mean, the school districts right now are cutting into their reserves just to get through the year. And how are they going to afford to bring in that kind of security? You'd be amazed at some of the people that they're saying, what we really need is tall fences around the school grounds, locked doors, and police officers walking around. And I said, we already have that. That's called jail. I mean, that's prison. And so you want educational institutions in case, for this possibility of 1 in a million that a psychopath or a sociopath is going to come on your campus and actually start killing.
Well, we're stunned by this, and yet the first cry that comes out is gun control, and you know the argument. You've seen it all over the press, and then Wayne LaPierre comes out with his comments, which was just demonized like you wouldn't believe. But now that the dust is settling, the reasoning behind what you're saying and what he is saying is beginning to surface and say, hey, wait a minute, we got to look at this, because the irony is, if I can say that, we have civil unrest. What do? We call the National Guard in. They're armed. Who's protecting the president? They're all armed. Who's protecting all of these Hollywood people? They're all armed.
Of course. Well, what we have is we have pacifists that are in charge of our education system. And it's okay for them to be pacifists. I mean, that's all right, except that their philosophy is not protecting the teachers and the children in these schools when a sociopath comes in and starts shooting.
Where do you see this going?
Well, it's not going to go away. This is becoming a national issue. I was called yesterday by an ex-legislator named Tom Mason, excuse me. He retired about 1994, and he now is the NRA's director of international gun issues. And he called, we talked for about half an hour, and he said that he had received copies of the newsletter and was very interested in the recommendation that I had put forth, wanted to know what kind of response I'd been getting, and whether or not I might be available to be called on to testify or to talk about this issue. And I said, I'm happy to debate anyone on this issue. I mean, can you imagine coming in and saying, there's been no change in what we're doing in the last 14 years. Our children still get killed. In Connecticut, assault rifles were already banned. It was already, you had locks on the doors, and the teachers are already in a lockdown mode, and we still lost 26. And somehow that's going to be acceptable just because you don't want guns on campus? It's not correct. You don't want guns in the hands of sociopaths on campus, and you don't want that to be the only response until the police can come and do a body count, which is unfortunately what has happened so far.
Yeah, it's just been, all right, so the president comes out, gives the vice president the authority to put together a commission to go after guns, and it looks like the Senate now is getting ready to go after guns. What's going to happen here?
Well, I mean, I think that the president is doing what presidents do, and that is when there is an outcry, you give something to make it look like you're doing something. And governments are famous for blue chip commissions, blue ribbon commissions, task forces, and those kinds of things, because what it does is it says we're acting, but you won't have any information for X number of months, and by then we'll see what the temperature is in the political arena.
So do you think there's going to be a move for gun control, and can it stick? I mean, I don't know what's going to... you remember the thing that happened just a couple of days ago where the journalist in New York City posted on Google all the people that own guns, and they showed it on the map. And of course, the restitution to that was they put her house on the map.
Right.
Well, the point is, when you look at the dots on that city, it was a tremendous amount. You're not going to collect all the guns in this country.
I've seen estimates between 250 million and 315 million guns already in circulation. And to say what we really need to do is stop selling some, certain kind of weapon, that, that bell can't be unrung. Yeah. Now, what it's really saying is that we want to start there, and then we want to disarm the people, which means the law-abiding people. Right. And the purpose of the Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's about ensuring that Americans have the ability to respond to tyranny in the event that which has occurred in Germany and Russia and Uganda and we could list so many countries over the years where the first step in a government that was becoming too powerful was to disarm the citizens.
Right, well, and the militia and all that. Let me ask you this. All right, have you heard from the governor on this?
No. I've heard nothing from any representative except for Representative Tim Freeman. He said, I've got your back, I'm behind you. I got an email from Representative Huffman saying he'd had 65 emails after the newsletter went out. Another representative, her assistant, said that there was 250 responses, all saying, support Representative Richardson in this position, because we need to assure that our children have some kind of protection.
Have you heard from the school unions?
I know. No, they don't talk to me too often.
No. Well, but what other solution is there? I mean, there really isn't, is there?
Well, one email response was just get signs at the front door saying, no guns allowed on this campus except those who have been qualified and trained and are concealed carry who will respond to lethal force. In other words,
really?
Choose some other school if you're coming on campus because we can respond
As if
here.
that was going to divert the bad guy.
Well, the idea is like putting a Sonatrol sign on your door, even if you don't have Sonatrol. The idea being maybe a burglar will go next door and not hit you. I mean, is there really any response? I'm not aware of any. We're not talking about arming all teachers. That would be very dangerous.
No. But you
are
are talking
about those that are interested and trained, so that you have the ability to respond if that was the appropriate action, depending on the circumstances.
So I would assume that there would be enough volunteers, retired or otherwise, that would give a couple of hours a day. I mean, there could be some kind of a scheduling that this could take place. I mean, you'd have to go through some kind of certification, wouldn't you?
Well, under the current law in Oregon, a school district has the ability to allow this to take place. I mean, you have the right with a concealed carry permit to go onto a campus. The only ones that really don't are employees of a school district where it says you cannot be employed here if you carry on campus or if you bring a weapon on, which we had this lawsuit with Medford last year. And so a school district merely would need to say, we're going to allow that to happen in certain instances. They could do like Hoover, which is it's Hoover School District, independent school district in Texas. They studied this for a year, and then they came back and said, we will allow concealed carry personnel, but we'd like them to have ammo that doesn't, that has the least amount of power to ricochet and those kinds of things. And so they had some restrictions on it, but they're welcoming those that are trained to carry in a concealed place. I mean,
now, you've seen the statistic like I have, and that is that when there is concealed and carry, the crime rate goes down.
Absolutely.
All right, I want to talk about that. We'll be right back with, and all of the surveys and even the national survey says you're on the right track.
Well, I believe I am, because what we do know is what we're currently doing is insufficient. When the only person who's armed on a campus is a psychopath who's intent on killing people, we need to make a change. I mean, that is inappropriate. It's interesting, I got a call the day after I sent out the newsletter from a local teacher who said he's been carrying a 9mm for years, that he understands what the rules are, but he's not going to allow another Columbine to occur in his school. I know of a principal who's recently retired. He carried for years, and he's on for 30 years, and he just did because he felt it was his responsibility to do what he could to help promote the security and safety of the teachers and the students.
Does a teacher have to notify the administration they're carrying?
It would depend on the terms of their employment contract, but they do not under the law.
Okay.
The concealed carry is allowed in Oregon in almost all locations, except for like courtrooms. There's a few places where it's excluded, but it's not a right, it's an affirmative defense. So if you were to be arrested for carrying, you could say, I've got a concealed carry permit, which is an affirmative defense, which trumps whatever rules you have that say I can't carry.
Okay, all right. Back to Newtown. I think perhaps people didn't know that school was in lockdown.
Oh yeah. They were doing all of the things that schools are currently told to do. And I mean, they had locked doors, so they only allowed the people in that were approved. Right. Apparently, the shooter shot his way in through the doors. When the shots begin, that's when you know that you're in a combat situation, a firefight, and there needs to be those that are able to respond. Even if you hunker down with your kids in a closet, you have the ability to respond if someone comes through the door. I mean, it's not like we're saying somebody's going to go and get into a firefight, but we want to have the opportunity for those who are trained and practiced to be able to respond based on the circumstances that exist.
Well, this is an incredible response because Newtown it went to a new low. It went to the innocence of most innocent. I mean, well, 9/11 was innocent too, but it had that kind of an impact on us. It had that kind of residual effect of, how could this possibly happen with kindergarten children, you know, so it went to a whole new level. You would think that people would want schools more secure, and the only thing lacking in total security right now would be a concealed weapon.
Well, I was sent a very thoughtful email by one of the school board members from Medford School District who said that we're already doing much of what you're suggesting. We have guards and lockdowns provisions and so forth at our middle schools and high schools, and you know we're on the same track. And I said, that's great, but understand two things. One is Sandy Hook was an elementary school, and you have none of those provisions in place in your elementary schools, so now you're choosing which schools will be protected and which won't. Secondly, your guards are identified, you know, they're known, and so anyone that came on campus with the intent to kill would make them their first targets. And so that removes that. And I said, and third, I understand in your budget that you're eating into your reserves. And so you're paying these expenses out of your savings. And soon those savings will be gone. Then what are you going to do? You're going to start laying off teachers so that you can have hired guards in every school when there's not a 1 in a million chance that a Medford school is actually going to be hit by a sociopath? Yeah. I mean, these are difficult questions, but they have financial consequences.
Well, don't we feel better when air marshals are on the airplane?
Absolutely.
We don't know who they are.
No.
We don't know who they are. So why wouldn't we have a plainclothes security person, armed security person in these schools?
The response that I got from those that were against having guns, most of them were just kind of knee-jerk responses. You're crazy to want to have more guns on campus when it's guns that are the problem. Well, it's not. It's the person behind the gun that is the problem.
It's a heart problem.
You know, and I said, so, you know, you obviously have not read the newsletter because they weren't. There was a liberal blog up in Portland that said, Representative Richardson is saying you should arm all the teachers. Here, let him know how you feel about that. And they put my phone number in my email. And so it was just kind of a response. So I sent back the link saying, read the newsletter, see this CNN report, and then write me back, and I'd be happy to respond to sincere questions or issues.
So where do you see this going, Dennis? Are you going to propose some legislation?
Well, there doesn't really need to be legislation as far as I see for Oregon, because school districts already have the authority to make these decisions. And so I don't want the federal government to have a war on sociopaths in schools, I don't think the state needs to be telling the school districts what they ought to do, although we could pass something that would say, like Utah. Utah says that you will not, that someone with a concealed handgun permit will not be precluded from entering into premises. And so they've kind of stopped teachers from being prevented from carrying there. And right now in Utah, there are hundreds of teachers receiving training because they've decided that's not going to happen in their classroom if there's anything they can do to help stop it. So I think that what we need to do is have it be an issue where parents and concerned citizens go to the school board meetings and say, we want a change in this lockdown policy. Stop the passivity. Do not put our teachers and our children at unnecessary risk.
Malls, same thing?
Same thing. Employers ought to encourage some of their employees, if they're interested. I'm not saying you force anyone, but if they're interested and want to have some training, maybe you can help pay for the training. Right now, teachers are being offered training for free if they want to receive training in proper use of handguns.
The other part of this equation that this last tragedy brought out was the mental health issue. And if you've ever dealt with people who struggle with family members of mental health, there is a real hard place in their life. It appears that the only way they can get help for that family member who suffers with mental issues doesn't really occur until they commit a crime.
That's really been the case. There is some training now going on with police officers. We had a tragedy several years ago here in Southern Oregon where a grown, mentally disturbed boy was threatening his family. The family called the police, but he wasn't on his meds and thought they could work it down. Well, the police came. He pulled out a knife and faced the police, and I'm not sure all the details, but anyway, they shot and killed him right next to his father, who would have never called for the help. He didn't feel it was that escalated, but they were responding, to someone that was armed and wouldn't respond to put down the knife. And so there can be training that will take place, and we need to make sure that happens, but we can't afford to just keep throwing more money at mental health. Mental, physical health, and social sciences have gone up 44% in the last 5 years. K-12 education's gone up 7.5% as far as our general fund support. We have limited resources, and we've got to be strategic.
I understand the resource issue, and I think that's legitimate, because I've also seen the abuses of mental health, where all of a sudden people are just categorized, and and that's part of the problem. But the other part of the problem is that people who are genuinely trying to control a family member, they don't seem to qualify for help until something bad happens.
And that needs to change.
I don't know.
We need to have greater training in response. And I'm not sure what the answer is going to be, but I firmly believe every social problem we have is being solved somewhere. And we don't have to just sit around a table and think that we're the only ones suffering it. We need to research it, talk to people, find out what's worked, what hasn't worked, and then adjust our policies accordingly.
Has the results of the Texas school been to the point where that could be used as an example?
Well, it could, except that they implemented it in October.
Oh, okay.
But already, what's happening in Utah, in Ohio, in Texas, there are things taking place where this discussion is going to the next level. And there are many wise and thoughtful people who are saying, we can't keep doing what we've been doing. Let's make a change. We want to have some armed response on campus, and it doesn't have to be the National Guard,
right,
or a police officer in uniform.
What's also part of this that's so interesting is that we have watched, as a result of Newtown, again, and the threat of gun control, gun sales go through the roof, ammunition sales go through the roof. I've been talking to women today who are saying, you know what, I'm tired of this, I'm going to get armed. I don't want this administration taking my guns. I mean, it seems like it fostered the other side of the equation on the one that they're trying to eliminate.
Well, quite often what the government intends to help, it hurts.
Right.
And in this instance, the number of people in America who want to be able to protect themselves far outweighs the pacifists or those that have an ulterior motive that would like to see the people disarmed. And so we're going to resist an interference with our Second Amendment rights in a lawful way. And one lawful way is to arm presently while the laws still allow it.
Where do you see this going, Dennis? We got a couple of seconds left here. I mean, what are you going to do to continue to bring this forward? Is it a volunteer thing among the schools? Or are you going to try to work with administrators? What do you see happening?
Well, I'm going to be in contact with our school board members and the school superintendents to help make sure that they understand that this isn't about arming every teacher. It's about a planned and rational response to a very serious concern, and one that could be afforded. It's not going to take money out of their budgets. I want to make sure that we don't have a problem with union contracts when you're saying that you're going to allow someone who's a union member to volunteer to provide some service. We need to make sure that they could really volunteer instead of having
a whole other can of worms.
And then this was brought up to me by an ex-school board member who said, you don't understand, there's collective bargaining issues. As soon as you say a teacher can volunteer to do anything, now you've got a problem because it will violate the collective bargaining agreements. So I need to make sure that that isn't an issue.
Well, thank you for standing up, and I think you're onto something. I don't know all the ramifications of it, but it appears to me that that's the rational approach. None of us like to have, this gun thing waving around out there, but on the other hand, if good guys don't have them, bad guys win.
That's what we've learned.
Yeah.
What we've been doing in the past has not worked. We need to have this conversation. There needs to be a rational approach to ensuring that we have greater safety that's affordable in our schools.
All right, and let me encourage you, Dennis writes on all this in his website, and it is DennisRichardson.com?
It's .org.
.org, okay, DennisRichardson.org. And thanks. Hang in there, pal. Okay. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.